Okay, good evening. My name is David Cashman. I'm with SEB Housing, and this is the Affordable Housing Information Session for the affordable units at the Bancroft Lofts in Framingham on 59 Fountain Street. This evening, we'll just go through some of the kind of biggest points about what this opportunity is, how you apply, how you're eligible, what to expect upon submitting an application, being entered into the lottery, and moving forward. If you've already gone to our website, we have a lot of the informational materials there. Hopefully you've been able to access those, but we have the information packet and an application, and I'll be going through largely some of the biggest points from the information packet and application. But this evening is for your benefit, so if you have any questions at any time, feel free to type them in the dialog box to the right of where you see me, and I'll stop where I am and answer them. Also, our information and how to get in touch with us is scattered throughout the informational materials, so if at any point when you're filling out an application or looking into this opportunity, if you have a question, feel free to reach out to us and be happy to go through it with you. So Bancroft Lofts, this is a brand new, beautiful development. It will consist, I think, of a total of 3 buildings. 2 of them, one of them is an already existing Bancroft building that's being rehabilitated. That building will contain up to 160 loft-style units that have, large windows, high ceilings, and exposed industrial features. The other building is a podium building, which is brand new. That building is going to contain 98 upscale units in 4 floors, above 2 levels of parking. And then there's also a 4,500 square foot amenity center right there on site that will house a large fitness studio, a co-working and community meeting space, and a gallery event space. And I think if you actually go on SEB's website or the Bancroft's website, you can kind of see the layout of the 3 buildings, and then they kind of abut the water. So pretty neat development site. And having that sort of additional building there with the fitness studio and those other amenities, which will be available to all of the residents of Bancroft Lofts, is a nice feature. In addition to that, there will be a half-acre outdoor courtyard and amenity space with a pool. So that's nice as well. So the Bancroft Lofts will in total have 258 apartments. Of those apartments, 26 will be affordable. And those 26 affordable units are broken down among studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms. There will be 7 studio units, and those will rent at a price of about $1,360 to $1,395 per month. Those have 1 bathroom. There will be 15 one-bedroom units that also have 1 bathroom, and those will rent from $1,519 to $1,565 per month. And there will be 4 two-bedroom units that have 2 bathrooms. Those are a little over 1,000 square feet, and those will rent from $1,661 to $1,720 per month. The reason for the slight spectrum of prices within each bedroom size has to do with which building it's in and how affordable rents get calculated. The utilities are different in the buildings. One of them, I think, has gas, where the other is electric. And that's the reason for the varying prices. It's not because some of the units are nicer or bigger than the other ones. It has to do with how affordable rents are calculated and what the set aside is for utilities. One thing to keep in mind is that the rents do not include utilities. So tenants will be responsible for paying heating, hot water, cooking, electricity, water, and sewer. So your ultimate rent, when you factor in those utilities, will be more than the rents that I just quoted. So just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, and you don't need to know this necessarily, but rents in this program are calculated according to numbers that are published by the federal government, and they're not published based on any individual applicant's financial picture. So what that means is that these rents are not going to change depending on what your salary is or how much money you have saved in the bank. So, someone may qualify for this program and another person may qualify for this program, and one person may have, let's say, makes $15,000 more per year and has, $30,000 more in the bank, but they're both going to pay the same rent if they're renting the same style unit in the same building. But what that also means is that each year when HUD publishes new area median incomes, and the area median incomes are what are used to calculate rents, those can change. They can't change in the middle of your lease. You would be advised ahead of time of any rent changes and what they would be. They tend not to be huge changes, and they tend to go up from year to year, but not always. Some years they can go down. Other years they can stay the same. But it's just something to keep in mind that, if you're in a unit and, you stay there for a year and then you're going to renew your lease, that not dissimilar from market rate units, the rents can go up in that second year and then again in that third year for however long you stay there. But they could also stay the same some years. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the eligibility requirements and sort of who can be eligible for this lottery and to move forward in one of these units. So, as this is affordable housing, it probably would come as no surprise that one of the requirements is that there are income limits to how much households can make and still be eligible. If someone's making $1 million, that's great, but they're not going to qualify for an affordable unit at a reduced rent. And by the way, these are brand new constructed units that are, for all intents and purposes, very, very similar to the market rate units that are also being built at this time for households who qualify for this program at a substantial discount from what they would rent for on the market rate. So one of the biggest things, as I just said, is households, in order to be eligible for one of these, have to qualify and have to have income and assets under certain parameters that are set by the program. There is priority for the larger units, for bigger households who need all of the bedrooms. That's not so much a program requirement for eligibility, but it is something to keep in mind in understanding later how, for the 2-bedroom units, how bigger households will get priority for those over smaller households. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go through the lottery and how the waiting lists are made. Households cannot own a home upon move-in. So you can own it at the time that you apply, but before you can sign a lease, you will need to have sold your home. And finally, households or their families, whoever's living in the unit, cannot have a financial interest. This is not something that comes up often. To the extent it comes up, it's usually something like, maybe someone who's interested in applying for this opportunity is related to the development team or the management team. It's not often that someone is, like an investor in the project, but if you were related to the developer or the management team, that is something that you would need to disclose and which would, unfortunately, probably disqualify you. Let's just kind of go through those and dissect those a little bit more, those 4 different criteria. So the first one I mentioned was the income. Income is your gross income. It includes everyone who's going to be signing the lease or who will be living in the unit. It's not, I said it's your gross income, so it's not your net income, it's not your take home, it's the gross. And it's a projection of what you'd be making over the next 12 months. So necessarily, in order to try and project what someone will be making going forward, we have to look at what they've been making, what they currently make, and extrapolate from that to try and determine what they'll be making for the next 12 months. Necessarily, that's imperfect. Circumstances can change, but that's how the program requires that we look at it, and so that is what we do. You should understand, and when you look through the application, you'll probably be cued into this, that the various sources of income are broad. The sort of most typical ones that people think of is what do they make at their current job, and that certainly is a source of income, but households can have other sources of income too that we do have to count as against that income limit. So, a household may have their 9-to-5 job with their employer, but maybe they're self-employed on the side. They sell stuff on eBay, or they drive for Uber or Lyft or some other such thing. Even if it's very part-time, that self-employment does count as income and would have to be added to whatever you make at your 9-to-5 job. There are other sources as well. So if you're receiving, child support or alimony, or if you have Social Security income or SSDI, or if you have, retirement distributions, not the full amount, but if you're over a certain age and every month you're drawing down from that, and those are repeated, that would count as income. Unemployment compensation counts as income. Periodic payments from friends or family counts as income. So maybe you have a family member who gives you $300 every 2 weeks or month for groceries and other life necessities. That's wonderful, but if it's repeated, then that's going to count as income. If it's a one-time thing or very sporadically, we can probably not count it. But if we see that it's every 2 weeks or month or something like that, that's going to be counted towards your income picture. You may have an asset that generates income, so typically bank accounts don't generate a whole lot, but you may have some other asset that generates some amount of income. That income would be added towards your income total. The one exception to income is full-time students who are dependents. We only count up to $480 of what they make. So, you could have a dependent who's a student and works and makes $10,000 a year, but we're only going to count $480 of it towards the income limit. The other exception is for minors, so 18 under the age of 18. So we don't count their income, but those are the only two exceptions. Other than those, we count the income of all household family members and pretty much all sources. Again, so when you're filling out the application, we do have a table on pages 7 and 8 where we list a lot of the different income sources that people can have, and I would just encourage you to look through those carefully so that you don't sort of neglect to report income that you may be receiving. Now, there's no minimum income limit, okay? And I didn't even say what the income limits are, but so they're based on household size. They're not based on the bedroom size that you're applying for. So and you don't have to memorize these because they're in the info packet, they're in the application, they're in the ad, they're on our website. So you don't have to worry about memorizing these. But for a household size of 1, they can make up to $67,400. For a household size of 2, they can make up to $77,000. Household size of 3, they can make up to $86,650. And for a household size of 4, they can make up to $96,250. And so what that means is that because the rents, which we talked about a little bit ago, are just based on the bedroom size, but the income limits are based on the household size, that means in theory, if two households, one consisting of one member and the other consisting of two members, were making right up to the income limits. So the household size of one, instead of making, they didn't make 67,400, but they made 67,000. So they're very close to being at the income limit. And the household size of 2 doesn't make 77,000, but they make 76,600. So they're really close to being at the income limit. But if they both apply for a studio or a 1-bedroom, the rent would be the same, which means that for that larger household size, that unit's going to be slightly more affordable because they make more money, because they're allowed to, because they're a bigger household size. Okay. Minimum income. So there's no minimum income. Okay. There are maximum income limits, and we have to look at those very carefully to make sure that people qualify. And we have to look at a lot of your income and income documentation, taxes, W-2s, things of that nature, pay stubs, to verify what your income is. We'd love to be able to just take people at their word, but the program requires that we really look into the documentation to ensure that people, in fact, qualify according to the documents that they submit. There's no minimum income that the program requires. So in theory, someone could make no income and not have a voucher, and they would be program eligible because the program only sets maximums. However, when a household after the lottery goes to apply for a lease, the management team is going to want to ensure that they have enough in income and assets to afford the rent. And it wouldn't do anyone any service to pass someone on through this process, enter them into the lottery, if we know ahead of time that they're never going to be able to qualify for a lease. It's not fair to the applicant. It's not fair to the leasing office. It's not really good for anyone. So we know from the management team that they screen households for lease eligibility the household income has to be 2.5 times the rent. Now, none of this applies if you have a voucher. So if you have a voucher, you can ignore this because the voucher kind of makes this irrelevant. But if you don't have a voucher, then you would need to make about 2.5 times the rent in income to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria. In terms of hard figures, what does that mean? So that means for a studio unit yearly, you'd have to make about $40,800. For a 1-bedroom, you'd have to make about $45,570. And for a 2-bedroom, you'd have to make about $49,830. Now, what I should say here is if you don't quite make that much, but you have some savings, that can be counted towards that minimum income threshold. I should also say that for SEB's purposes, in terms of entering you into the lottery, the minimum income is not a program requirement. And so for our purposes, if you're close, we don't want to screen you out if it is close. Now, it's different with the maximum incomes because that is a program requirement, and we have to be really careful that we're not approving households who don't actually qualify for this program. So I guess what that means is that for the minimum income threshold, we will look at it. But if someone's close, we will say that's good enough for us. We are not going to screen you out because you're, $1,000 or maybe even $2,000 under what the leasing office says they'll allow. Ultimately, that is something that you will have to take up with them, and they'll have to make a decision about whether you meet their lease screening criteria. So for if you make under $40,000, you haven't really met that minimum threshold for a studio, which would be the lowest amount. We may pass you on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've determined that you meet that lease screening criteria. It just means that SEB says, hey, this isn't, it's close enough for us. Ultimately, you'll have to apply with the leasing office and they will make that decision. But again, if you have some assets, those can be considered to bump you up, even if your take-home pay is less than the minimum income thresholds. Okay. In addition to income, we do look at assets, but as this is a rental development, there is no asset limit. Okay, so you could have quite a bit in assets, and that is not going to put you over an asset limit. Now, as I said before, in income, oftentimes assets do generate income, right? So that's kind of one of the most relevant aspects of your assets. If you have an asset that generates quite a bit of income, that income could kick you up over the income limit. But in terms of just the asset, in theory, you could have a bank account with, $250,000 in it. There isn't some limit where we're going to say you're over the asset limit. So there, usually shouldn't be much sort of motivation to try not to disclose what your assets are, because unless it's generating income that's going to kick you over the income limit, it's not going to disqualify you. Now, you can't own a home. I said that already, so you would have to sell that. But other than that, you don't have to, divest yourself or get rid of an asset that you have. Just list it. Just tell us what they are. We do have to consider them all. And assets, just like income, can be varied. So checkings and savings accounts are some of the kind of most common ones that people think of. But there are other types of assets that people have. They may have retirement assets. They may have mutual funds, stocks, bonds, an investment property, trust account, among others. So just like with the income, when you're filling out the application, I would encourage you to look at the asset table on page 9 closely and just list all your different assets so you don't fail to list them when you're filling out your application. Just so take a look at that closely. Okay, let's talk about household size and composition. So one of the things I mentioned towards the beginning is that for the 2-bedroom units, there will be priority given to households who need 2 bedrooms. For the 1-bedrooms and studios, all households who qualify will have the same priority. When you fill out your application, one of the first questions will ask you what your household type is. And you can only be 2 types. You can be a household type 2 or a household type 1. And what those types mean is they correspond to the number of bedrooms that the program says that household would require. So a household type 2 is a household who the program would say requires 2 bedrooms, and a household type 1 is a household who the program would say only requires 1 bedroom or a studio. When we do the lottery for the 2-bedroom units, type 2 households will get priority over type 1 households, regardless of where the household is drawn in the lottery drawing. So those are pretty self-explanatory. When you fill out your application, we give examples of the different household makeups that could constitute a type 2 household and the different household makeups that could constitute a type 1 household. If when you're filling that out, you're wondering, why is SEB asking me about this? What does this mean? Just means, like I said, for the 2-bedroom units, when we do the lottery, type 2 households will be given priority over type 1 households. Other than that, there is no real significance to your household type. Just don't falsely claim that you're a type 2 when you're a type 1 to get priority for a 2-bedroom unit, because we would need to fix that after the lottery. We can't give priority to a household who falsely claims that they're type 2 when they are not. But a household type 1 can apply for a 2-bedroom. They certainly are allowed to. They just, again, they don't get priority for it. Let me step back for a second, just kind of go through the steps here. So what we've been talking about generally up to this point is kind of the first step in this process, which is to submit a lottery application. The deadline to do so is December 21st. I would recommend that you, if you're interested, try and get it in well ahead of that deadline. Most households who apply for the affordable housing program do not submit a 100% complete lottery application on the first try. And that's not because households, are purposefully not doing it. It's just because there's a lot of income and asset documentation that is required to submit a totally complete application. Furthermore, sometimes even when you submit a complete application where you've addressed each point on the application, you've put in everything right, or you've submitted all the documents that are requested, sometimes upon reviewing a document, that will raise further questions and require additional documentation submissions. So just as an example, let's say you submit all your recent bank statements as is required. But upon looking at your bank statements, we see that there are repeated deposits of $300 that for the last 3 months have come in twice a month. And they're not tied to the job that you've told us about, and we really have no idea where they're coming from. That's a case where we would need to request additional documentation to determine where is this steady supply of bi-monthly $300 deposits coming from? Is there another source of income? Is there another job that we haven't been told about that we need to know about? That happens sometimes. And if you wait right up until to December 21st to submit an application, we take a look at it and we say, hey, this is great. You've given us everything, but what are these deposits? We need further explanation. You have 5 days to get it. Now, all of a sudden, you're racing to get those things. So while I'm not encouraging anyone to purposely submit a wildly incomplete application, I would say that if you think it's pretty close, even if you know it's not 100% complete, submit it ahead of the deadline. That way you know if any of the things that you thought were complete may actually not be totally complete. And so you can begin to work on those ahead of the 21st deadline. I would definitely err more on the side of getting it in and seeing where you stand as you continue to work on it, even if you know it's not complete. I would err on that side versus I'm going to sit on it and build it until I think it's absolutely perfect, and then I'll wait till December 20th and then I'll submit it then. Because even if you think it's perfect, as I said, there may be something in there that requires additional documentation gathering and submission on your point. And you're probably not going to want to be pestering people or trying to track stuff down going to, Christmas time and holidays, or just in general when you're banging up against the deadline. So earlier is better than later. Now, and I guess it's probably sort of obvious from that this is not a one bite at the apple type of scenario. So it's not like if you submit an application and it's not perfect the first time, then you're done and the process is over. That's absolutely not the case. To the contrary, if you submit an application and it's incomplete or there's anything that, kind of needs further explanation, we will send you a letter with very specific bulleted points about what you need to do to complete the application. So this is usually a process where there's back and forth. It is frequent that households need to try 2, 3, 4 times to get a totally complete application. SEB is not trying to make the process difficult for anyone. We're merely, screening households as we're required to according to the program. And so, if you feel frustrated with us during the process, I get it, but I can just keep in mind that we're not trying to purposely make it difficult. We just are required to make sure that households are in fact eligible, and we do have to look through a lot of documentation in order to do that. Now, if you submit an application and we determine that you're not eligible, we will let you know that in writing, and we'll let you know why. And we'll also let you know that if you disagree and you wish to appeal it, you can, and we'll have someone else, we'll take another look at it. If you are eligible, we will let you know. We will send you a letter, and I encourage you to take a look at that letter. That letter will have some important information in it. So for one, that letter will have your lottery application number. That number will be in the form of A dot blank, blank, blank. It'll be 3 numbers, the very first of which will be A.001. Those numbers have no significance or sort of bearing on where you are in the lottery or how you're going to move forward. Those numbers are merely anonymous identifiers to be used in the lottery to keep your name and information private. So A.001 is not the number 1 lottery household. They're just the first household to submit a totally complete application for the lottery. In addition to your lottery application number, the letter that we send you when we let you know that you're eligible will include the different household members that you listed. So you want to make sure that those are all correct. When we're certifying a household, we're certifying the specific people, not just the number of people. So you want to be sort of thoughtful about who you're applying with, because, if you list John, just making up a name here, if you list John on your application as your co-applicant, and we look at your documents and John's documents, and we decide you're eligible as a 2-person household, if a couple months down the road when we run the lottery, you say, actually, I want to substitute Mike for John, but we're still a 2-person household, that's fine, right? And we would say, well, no, not necessarily. We have no idea, what Mike's financial picture is. Mike might be way over the income limit, and so you can't just sort of mix and match any 2 people. So look at the people we list in the lottery eligibility letter we send you. Make sure that the people that you meant to apply with. You can't necessarily just be swapping household members or adding household members down the road. There can be some exceptions to that, but as a general rule, the household you apply with is the household we certify is the same household you're expected to move in with. Also in that letter will be, date and time of the lottery and how to access it, whether you qualify for local preference, your household size, what unit sizes you applied for. So you want to look through all that and make sure that it all lines up with your expectations and what you thought that you had submitted to us. The lottery will be held on January 7th at 6 p.m. It'll also be done in the same format we're doing it right now. In the lottery, there will be 2 drawings, okay? So in this lottery, we do have to implement a local preference. Local preference just means that for 70% of the units, which in this case is 18 units, so for 18 of the units, we have to give priority to households who qualify for local preference as against households who do not. Local preference is defined as households who live in Framingham, who work in Framingham, or who have children attending the Framingham schools. Local preference does not trump household type for the 2-bedroom units. So just to give you an example, when we make the waiting list after the lottery for the 2-bedroom units, the top households will all be type 2 households who are local preference. The next tier of households will all be type 2 households who are not local preference. The next tier will be type 1 households who are local preference. And the last tier will be type 1 households who are not local preference. In the information packet on page 12, we list how the waiting list will be made, how the priorities are given. I don't think you need to get too caught up in local preference, not local preference. But if you're sort of curious, for 70% of the units, similarly situated households, local preference households will be higher on the list than non-local preference households. For the other 8 units, there will be no such local preference. So, I think definite moral of this story is if you don't, live in Framingham or work in Framingham or have kids going to the Framingham schools, i.e. you don't qualify for local preference, do not think that this is a wasted exercise, that you'll never be able to lease a unit. That is not the case. I would say to the contrary, you still have a very, very good chance of being able to lease a unit. And if you are interested, I encourage you to apply. I should note as well that you can apply for any household type that you want, any household size you want, and multiple, and there's absolutely no disadvantage to doing so. So I'd really encourage you to be over-inclusive when you fill out your lottery application, and it asks you which bedroom sizes you're applying for. If you think that you're, possibly interested in any of them, fill them all out, because there's no disadvantage to filling all of them out. If you're not eligible for one of them, but you are for the other 2 or whatever the case may be, we'll let you know. But it's not like if you apply for more, you sort of make it harder to get one or the other, or sort of disadvantage yourself for one of the house bedroom sizes. It's not the case. There's no downside. On the other hand, if you don't apply for a certain bedroom size, it's not as easy as later on in the process when we're doing the lottery saying, actually, I wish I had applied for a 2-bedroom. I want you to just kind of, slot me in there. It may be too late to do it at that point. So when filling out the application, apply for all unit sizes that you think you may be interested in. And later on down the road, if you're eligible for several and you have waiting list positions for different bedroom sizes, just, you may end up getting a choice. It's possible you're eligible for 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. You apply for both and you may end up getting to pick. But you'd rather have that choice later down the road than to wish you had applied for something that you hadn't applied for, and it may be too late to fix it. So when we do the actual lottery drawing, there'll be two lottery drawings, and it'll be here via YouTube and via conference call for anyone who wants to watch. The lotteries typically don't take that much time. Everyone's lottery application number is on a note card. I basically put all the note cards in a box and randomly draw them out. I'll hold them up on the screen and call them out as I go. And I'll do it twice. I'll do it once for all the households who qualified for local preference, and then I'll do it a second time for every single household that was in the lottery. Now, you're certainly encouraged to come and watch if you want to. And as a general matter, it's better to get picked earlier in the lottery rather than later. In a way, the lottery drawing, I suppose, is a little anticlimactic because as I'm doing the drawing, households who are watching, and I, frankly, don't know exactly what it means, because as I'm drawing out a number, let's just say I drew out, number A.005, I don't know what, bedroom size that household applied for. I don't know what household type they are. I don't know if they have a disability and would get priority for some of the, there are 4 one-bedroom units that have features built out for persons with mobility impairments. I don't know if, the person has a mobility impairment. I don't know any of those things, and neither do you, right? And so, when I draw them out, you just don't know exactly what it means at that moment because you don't have any of that information. And again, all of these numbers are mixed in together, right? So when I'm doing the drawing, the general drawing, let's just say, that's households who applied for studios, that's households who applied for a 1-bedroom, and that's also households who applied for the 2-bedroom. So, your number might get picked number 5 and you think, oh, I'm number 5, but not necessarily. I mean, the 4 households ahead of you may not even have applied for the same bedroom that you did. So maybe you could be number 1. Or conversely, maybe you're a type 1 household who applied for a 2-bedroom unit and you got picked number 1 in the lottery and you think, awesome, I got picked number 1, I'm number 1. And the answer is, well, not necessarily, because you're a type 1 household. And so, every type 2 household who applied for a 2-bedroom is going to be on the waiting list higher than you. So, so you might ask, so when do you kind of know where you are in terms of moving forward? Well, the answer is, after we do the lottery drawing, that same night, usually within in a matter of a few hours, I will sort all of the drawing according to the required priorities, and I will make the waiting lists. And there'll be several different waiting lists. There'll be waiting lists for the 2 bedrooms, the 1 bedrooms, the studios, and if applicable, if there are any households who qualified who indicated they had mobility impairments, there'll be a separate waiting list for the 1-bedroom mobility impaired units. But there'll be several different waiting lists. You'll be on every waiting list that you qualified for, right? So, if you applied for the 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and were eligible for both, you'll be on waiting lists for both. If you only applied for the studios, you'll just be on the studio waiting list. And whatever if you applied for the studios, the 1s and the 2s, then you'll be on at least 3 different waiting lists. The waiting lists will be ordered in sort of chronological order that households, or not chronological, but top to bottom in the order that households will get to move forward in the next step. Okay, so even though, as I said, the lottery drawing itself can be a little anticlimactic because you don't know exactly what it means when I'm doing it, rest assured that within a few hours you will, provided you have email. If you don't have email, maybe 2 days because I have to send it to you snail mail. But if you have email, within a few hours of the lottery drawing, I will send you an email with the waiting list and some other information. And those waiting lists you'll be able to look at and say, okay, I was on the 1-bedroom waiting list, I'm number 4, and I'm number 10 on the 2-bedroom list, and I'm number 15 on the studio list, or whatever it is, right? And then that'll give you a sense of kind of your chances of being offered an opportunity to move forward in the next step. So the next step is to apply for a lease, okay? It's important to keep in mind that if you've made it that far, that's great. That means you're program eligible. You've gotten through the headache of submitting a complete lottery application with all the income and asset documentation, which is probably the hardest part. The next step is we then pass you on to the leasing office, and because again, SEB Housing is not the management team. We're not the leasing office. We're not on site. We pass you off to them. We exchange, we give you their information and we give them your information. And then you then have to schedule applying for a lease with them. And we'll remind you of this, but again, at this point, we don't, SEB doesn't do lease screenings. So we're not looking at your, if you have a criminal background or your tenant history, what your landlords have said about you or your credit or any of those things, so those are not part of the screening we do. So what that means is there are households who are program eligible, meaning that, they meet the requirements of the affordable housing program, but who unfortunately are not lease eligible. And so, if you get entered into the lottery or even the night of the lottery, you get a good waiting list position, do not immediately go to your current landlord and say, hey, I'm getting an affordable unit, I'm giving my notice and I'm moving out, because there is still this next big step, which is to apply and be eligible for a lease. And some households may end up not being eligible for a lease. So you don't want to give that notice if that applies to you, until you have applied for a lease, are eligible, and really, have reserved a unit and have a move-in date. And maybe at that point, you make that decision. But I would counsel against doing it before then, because there's still kind of a lot of unknown. And then, so you apply for a lease, and if you're lease eligible, that's great. You can set a move-in date and move into your unit, and then you're kind of done with that process for a whole year. If you do decide that you love, living at the Bancroft and you want to renew your lease for another year, then per the program requirements, you do have to renew your eligibility each year. That may be with SEB housing, it may be not, or may not be. But whatever the case, you do have to update your documents and show that you're still eligible. Having already done that to be entered into the lottery, you'll have some familiarity with that process and what's required. And usually, recertifying in a future year is easier than initially getting into the lottery. You have some baseline. We may already have documents on file. Additionally, you can make more money. And we list this in the information packet too, but basically you can make up to 140% of the income limits and still be eligible. And what that means in terms of real dollars is, just by way of example, if you're a household size of 1, if you're trying to be entered into the lottery, you can make up to $67,400. But if you are in the lottery and then you end up renting a unit and you want to, a year down the road, you want to renew and you're trying to recertify to show that you're still program eligible, you can then make up to $94,360. So not quite $30,000, but pretty close. So there's a pretty nice cushion there for households to still maintain program eligibility. And so, if in the interim year when you're living at the unit, maybe, you're lucky and you've done a great job at work and your boss wants to give you a little raise, provided it's not a, $27,000 or, $30,000 raise or in that ballpark, you should be okay to renew, which is good. And every year after that, if you continue to want to stay in the unit, you do have to renew. But again, as you go through it, it's something that you gain familiarity with and should become easier. I think I had mentioned there are some mobility impaired units or units built out for persons with mobility impairments. Those households who need those units will get first priority, and they'll be on the waiting list even for units that don't have those features. So they may end up having a choice for the 1-bedrooms. They may qualify for a mobility impaired 1-bedroom unit, but may end up electing one of the other 1-bedroom units instead, and they'll have that choice. Those units can end up being offered to households who don't need the features if there aren't any households who need them. So we'll just kind of see when we do the lottery. It does happen sometimes. There are 4 1-bedroom units with those features. It's quite possible we could have no households who need them, and if that's the case, they can be made available to households who don't need them. So that's kind of an overview of it. Are there any questions? Any questions? All right. Well, again, if you do have questions that come up, and a lot of times, you don't know exactly what your questions are until you start filling out an application and going through it, you can always email us. You can call us. We're happy to go over any questions that you might have with you and try and help you through the process. I would just leave you with something I know I've said already, but if you're interested in this opportunity, and we hope you are, get that application in earlier rather than later, so that if there's anything that needs further work, you've got some time to work on it and aren't rushing before the deadline. And we hope to see your application soon. So thanks for tuning in, and have a great night.